I just enjoy the fact that you talked about young veterans, and I thought how fantastic they might be considered a young veteran.
Dude, I ate so much. Fuck.
So listen, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here. Obviously, I'm here to discuss and have conversation about transitioning veterans and some of the challenges and what that means. And frankly, you may be asking yourself, besides being a combat veteran, what makes this guy an authority on issues regarding transitioning veterans and the challenges that they're faced with in the veteran community. What I'll tell you is I had initially thought about almost doing like this freestyle conversation about what this means. However, I thought it would be better because I'm very passionate about this stuff, and it would probably be better for me to write things down to keep me on track. Otherwise, I will pass the hour and a half time that I've allotted to have this conversation, right? About an hour and a half? Okay. All right.
Perfect.
So,
we have to get like a group
so
picture
I've
together.
had the experience of transitioning twice. Once from military service, and then many years later from government paramilitary service. Neither was without challenges. For the past 7 years, I've been a mentor to the Veterans Treatment Court. We had court today, and one of my mentees graduated, so it was a very joyous occasion for me. Typically, mentees in the treatment court, it takes them anywhere from a year and a half to 2 years before they graduate. So that was a big deal, not only for him, but for others who have been supporting his efforts inside the treatment court. As a mentor, I've probably seen every issue imaginable that can be correlated to transitioning challenges, including suicide ideology. In fact, suicide ideology is so prevalent that I began a quest for knowledge to garnish the tools to be able to thwart veterans from suicide. After a series of courses, I eventually became an instructor for the Nevada Coalition of Suicide Prevention, and I've taught and certified mentors in the Henderson Veterans Treatment Court on suicide prevention practices, along with many members of our community, including some of our elected officials. I started a nonprofit to make the pathway for transitioning veterans much easier than my own. I'm actively involved with veteran organizations, and I serve as a board member for 6 organizations that are geared for social and economic veteran success. And I'm the Veterans Outreach Coordinator and Liaison for some of our elected legislative officials. So there's some experience in terms of me being comfortable about talking about this. What I will say is, now that I've high-fived myself, I will get into the conversation about what this looks like. So really, what's with transitioning veterans, and why do we hear so much about them? After all, these are supposed to be rough and tumble individuals who have had some of the best training in the world. And frankly, there are many factors that transitioning veterans have in terms of challenges. And while there are many factors, I would like to just key in and maybe discuss a few of them. Veterans experience, as they transition, a loss of identity after leaving military service, regardless of their age, gender, rank, or branch of service. Military personnel come from a place of defined roles and mutual respect, particularly those who have experience in leadership positions. The structure of defined roles, coupled with mutual respect, is essentially lost as veterans transition into the civilian marketplace, where there is clearly a disparaged value of the experience and capabilities that they bring. For some transitioning veterans, this obvious disparagement causes outlining issues of self-worth, particularly if there are additional issues with family life, employment, and other factors which may obviously lead them to suicide ideology. Another issue is that some transitioning veterans experience anxiety and self-induced stress of the unfamiliar and unknown factors of being involved in the civilian sector. Now, this can encompass everything from the real considerations of how income will be derived to loss of purpose. So you may be asking yourself, how is it possible that many military personnel who are capable of working in any condition across the globe, but when they return home, there's anxiety and oftentimes self-induced stress regarding this next chapter of their life? So let's explore really the next issue. Most veterans experience a loss of connection. regardless if they're leaving the military with family or not. There are a multitude of support components that exist on every base across the U.S., and they're designed to support military families from everything from babysitting to education. So these support elements are extremely prevalent, particularly during a deployment. Military family support structures are specifically designed so that spouses and children feel connected. It's this type of connectivity and support system that is lost for the family unit when leaving military service. So for the service members, the issue of lost connectivity occurs because military service members generate bonds between themselves, and that's tough to duplicate sometimes in the civilian sector, particularly for those who serve in combat arms, special operations, or any of the outlining support elements that support those folks. Most of my friends who offer me the greatest sense of authenticity, frankly, are veterans, including those folks that I've served with on paramilitary government projects overseas. So it's common for veterans to turn to clubs and organizations to replace the bonds and purpose they felt while in the military. Motorcycle clubs and nonprofit organizations are the two leading groups that veterans will seek for a sense of connectivity and belonging. So you may be asking yourself, how is it possible that veterans are successful when operating in some of the worst conditions possible, foregoing basic levels of comfort, and far away from the safety of home, but upon returning to the civilian sector, experience bouts of PTS, depression, anxiety, and loss of purpose? First, military personnel are trained to what we call embrace the suck, right? And essentially what this means is that the more challenging the situation, the more a service member will constitute it as normal and try to navigate through it
She's
on
on
their
there
own.
too.
You know, frankly, that's why so many service members with service-related issues don't seek help. So service members will always believe that there is someone less fortunate than themselves. And this translates to an ideology that they're not entitled, nor will they seek benefits or relief. What I'll hypothesize is that the reason we don't see these issues occurring while military personnel are working either overseas or on a military installation is because these service members have an automatic built-in support mechanism amongst each other.
Jen finds history.
So support structures and mechanisms are generally absent during the transition into the civilian sector. While in the military and working in a squad, a team, or a group, there is always a constant check to make sure that everyone is okay. Now I'm not suggesting that depression and stressors don't occur while in the military, while someone is serving. I'm suggesting that the issues and components that occur while transitioning into the civilian sector are separate issues. Because there's a serious lack of initial support for service members when leaving the military, which causes a real challenge that exists for them. So veterans end up in places sometimes like the Veterans Treatment Corps because they self-medicate with drugs and alcohol to thwart their stress and anxiety. They end up doing something stupid while intoxicated or during an anxiety attack, which lands them in jail and then subsequently a place like the Veterans Treatment Corps. Now, there are some solutions that can only come from federal legislation and possible state legislation, but I wanted to examine what can we do from a community perspective. First, it's important to recognize that most veterans are tired of hearing that they're broken, they have limitations or behavioral issues that are related to military service. Now, I know that sounds contradictory to what I've just outlined, but as a collective body, veterans are not broken. In fact, we're very capable of leading some fantastic lives. The veteran community itself has instilled its own version of taking care of one another. Much like we did while we were in the military, except in the civilian sector, we're just going to call it in the form of nonprofits. And that's really how we operate amongst each other. So what does that mean, right? It means to be part of the solution, the best thing that you can do is educate yourself and support legitimate nonprofits that operate in our community. And I can tell you that I use the word credible or legitimate often when speaking about veteran support organizations, and I do that with both purpose and intent. We live in a marketplace that breeds deplorable behavior regarding supposed nonprofits. I can tell you that the veteran community has experience with several scrupulous individuals and organizations that do not do what they claim to do.
Yep.
In fact, they have made conning community members a regular practice as a source of generating personal income.
That's right.
So much like some of you may have gotten calls from friends during the election cycle and they say, hey, I know that you're involved heavily with local politics. Can you tell me who to vote for? Which judge do you know? Which, the person who's on my ballot for Senate, are they good? Are they bad? What I can tell you is I get calls on a regular basis about which organizations do what and the credibility of those organizations. And what I'd like to say is that I'm happy to be a resource for anybody who feels like they need the guidance, because there's a lot to navigate when we take a look at this marketplace and we look at how many nonprofits actually exist. In part of the solution, what I would say is, as an organization, for what you folks do, please continue to push and involve your members in the same manner that you have already demonstrated regarding our veterans and active duty personnel. You may find it beneficial to partner with one of our legitimate veteran organizations in the future to help raise funds or awareness of various causes. I hope that I've been able to break down just a couple of very significant points in terms of what it looks like for some folks to transition. And I certainly would be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding what this looks like. But I certainly want to say thank you very much for your time and listening to what I have to say.
Yay!
Thank you so much. This is amazing.
That was good, right?
So, do you have any questions? Christine?
Oh, there's Q&A.
Fisher, do you need this? I can come to you.
So I drive down certain streets, and always on a corner here and there, I see someone that says, I'm a veteran, I need help. And I think of this city as being one that has a lot of help for veterans. How does that still happen, or what can we do to help that person?
Drugs. There's so many resources
In
here.
order to get treatment,
Here's what I'll say, because most of the
be
time,
clean in
what
order for
you're
the
going to
VA to
find
give
that
you
is that
treatment.
probably someone who's homeless, right?
Huh?
Who's going to be on the corner panhandling for money.
You have to be
Get any
clean.
help from the VA,
But veteran
you
homelessness is
can't
a real
walk
issue
past
that
it.
we have. We have that though in every state across the nation.
Still
It
work.
exists. One of the biggest reasons that it exists is not necessarily a lack of resource. It exists because these veterans have found their own solace in alcohol and drug abuse. They just simply have. And because they come from environments where we embrace the suck, where if you can do me a favor and give me the most shit that you can, I want to demonstrate how I can move through, right? I mean, that
Yep.
really is like this mentality that a lot of veterans share. What happens with homeless veterans is that while they may be given the
Veterans'
opportunity
kids
to
have
attend a
that
shelter
too.
or some type
So,
of
like,
room,
I have that
board, whatever that
PTSD
looks
by
like.
proxy. Like,
Always what it
you
comes
learn
down
to
is
become a
the
masochist
factor that none of these
because
places allow
you'll be
drugs
taught
and
that you're
alcohol
weak if you
inside
can't
their
handle
facilities.
everything that's being
And
thrown
as sad
at
as
you.
it is,
So
these
that's,
veterans would
y'all
rather
come home
have
and you
their
do that to your
drugs
children.
alcohol
And then
to self-medicate
fuck
than a
ups
roof
like me
over
are
their head.
born.
Because frankly, they can survive and exist out in the open airway. I mean, they're probably more of our combat veterans, right? Or veterans who have been involved in support elements. And really what I mean by that, just so we're clear, is that, look, we have our veterans who are on the front line regardless of branch of service, who are conducting operations and really out there getting things done. What a lot of people don't realize is there's support elements to that. And those support elements are seeing sometimes just as much action as we'll call them your line individuals are. And so they can't be forgotten. Think of the medics, right? Who are part of that support element when you've got your special operations moving forward. I promise you they're not moving forward without medical support. So if you wanted to be in the military and your drive was to be a medic so that when you got out, you can now go to medical school or further your education, which is a great way to do it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to see some very significant things that are going to change who you are. And when you come out, you're going to have to deal with some transitioning issues. So I just wanted to provide that overlay that is support elements as well. But that's essentially why we have some of this veteran homelessness.
They're not ready for help.
They're not ready for help. I think that was a great way of putting that. Ma'am?
I try to support the treatment court as much as I can and go to all the trials that they have or whatever, but haven't been open to the public now. So do you know when we'll be meeting again to support that and to go to the treatment court? And will it be open to the public soon? 'Cause I
My
haven't
sleeves don't
heard
want to stay in
lately.
place. I need some duct tape.
So that's a good question. What I can tell you is, listen, I have experience in the treatment courts that exist in Las Vegas. We're both in Henderson and at the Justice Center in Las Vegas. So the two places that I've been most heavily involved with. In Henderson, which has become essentially my home because frankly, it got to be too much. I was actually losing some things in business because of my advocacy. And I had to slow down what I was doing. And so because I live in Henderson, I focus primarily on the Henderson treatment court.
I know all
We
about
had
that tape
graduation
life,
today. We asked
girl.
that limited people show up, and so there were very limited people that did show up. It was still fantastic. I don't see the courts opening for quite some time. Not because they're not interested in having community members come in so that we can showcase what we are actually capable of doing in terms of the treatment itself. I think it has more to do with some of the governor's orders in terms of closing things down and some of the COVID issues that we face. So that was a very long answer of I don't know.
Thank you, Byron. Any other further questions? Byron, it's our pleasure and privilege. We actually, all through our course of our meetings, usually have little buckets
He
on
gonna
our
find me a
table,
job.
and we ask people to put their spare change at the end of the meeting. This year, we only had 3 meetings, January, February, March.